Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tobias Kind-Rieper. I'm the global lead on mining and metals within WWF. We are looking into environmental and social impacts along the supply chain of various commodities, such as the one on metals, iron ore, copper, gold, and so on and so forth, as well as aggregates such as sand, and as well, obviously, fossil fuels, so coal, oil, and gas. And I'm delighted and a big thank you for having me today at the Responsible Raw Materials Conference. And I would like to give a short presentation on the work we do today with a more detail and highlight on actually issues related to decarbonization and to copper issues along the supply chain. So first of all, to showcase who we are, WWF is one of the world leading and biggest environmental and conservation NGOs in the world. We were founded in 1961. We have about 100 offices around the globe with a lot of employees and supporters, as you can see on the screen. And today I would love to get into the part about climate change vulnerability of mining for the mining sector itself, what climate change means for the sector. And I highlighted that today as an example for the copper industry. As you all are aware, copper plays a huge role for the energy transition, as well as for issues such as e-mobility and so on and so forth. And what we can see is has been a study done by the Environmental Agency in Germany about climate change vulnerability assessments for the mining sector, and this one is especially on the copper issues. And we can see that a different kind of risk related to climate change, which is on exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity of certain countries where copper mining plays a big role. Obviously, the biggest country for copper mining is Chile, afterwards Peru, China, USA, and obviously Australia, DRC, Zambia, and other countries as well. And in those, they were ranked within these components of the vulnerability for the mining sector. And we can see that there are different kind of problems, so to call, in the DRC and in Zambia, for example, exposure due to climate change is quite big. The exposure means the extent of which human society is supporting the sector and stressed by the future challenging on the climate change conditions. And this, for example, is not so much an issue in Chile, but it is in the DRC and Zambia. But we can see as well that the sensitivity, the degree to which people and the sector they depend on are affected by climate-related perturbations are actually quite high as well in countries such as Zambia and not so much in Chile. What this basically shows, and I don't want to get into much detail, is that there is a huge vulnerability for the sector itself across the different kind of countries we are talking about, and there are overall a high-ranked vulnerability for those, especially in countries such as Peru, as well as China, DRC, and Zambia. And this obviously plays a big importance as well for the questions on financing it and to look into what actually this means for the sector itself, where to put money in, and what kind of components are important in terms of the overall vulnerability for the sector. In the terms of our focusing on different kind of issues related to those, as you know, WWF is quite big when it comes to climate issues, to forestation and deforestation issues, as well as biodiversity. And another part which is quite a big one in our work across sectors, so not only in the mining sector itself, is water and water risk. So-called water stewardship angles and work we do on that. We have a tool called the water risk filter tool, where we have different kind of companies registered in looking into what their water risk related to their company and site level is. We have companies such as Starbucks, H&M, Google, Target, and IKEA using that tool to look into what kind of risks they exposure on their site. And we can see that first of all, we did that with the mining sector, and I think this is quite interesting for obviously for the conference on raw materials today. Is there are three different kind of risk. Obviously, the physical risk is one, which I just explained in the previous slide. The regulatory risk, I think a lot of colleagues here in this call will We'll see that as well when it comes to issues related to mining and operations on site, with weak law enforcement, with weak mining codes and implementation of those laws. And the last point is reputational risk, which obviously is also quite a big issue when it comes to, the tailing dam break, for example, in Brazil in 2019. In those water risk related scenarios, as we call them, we did an analysis on the mining sector itself. And what you can see in those slides, or in this particular slide, is that we ranked them the overall water risk related to different kind of commodities, which is quite interesting. And one of the biggest, risk related to that is the commodity of coal, as well as palladium and bauxite. And we can look into this detail and what kind of risks are related to that. And I just want to highlight that because water plays a huge role, especially when I just explained the copper part, as well as copper is a huge part of the, of the financing and the business case of a copper mine. So this water risk, which is the front line of climate risk, is incredibly important to understand that, because it's first of all about the scarcity issue, and then it comes with the business case, as well as due to the climate change, the flooding of events, where we have seen that already in eastern parts of Australia, where flooding of mining sites and exposure to those mining sites has been a huge risk to that areas and to those sectors as well. So what the tool can do is support those, looking into what those risks are and actually give guidance on how to change those and mitigate those in the ideal world, obviously. And we need to start thinking about landscape level solutions and nature-based solutions that can not only help tackle the climate crisis, but also begin to enhance resilience on water issues. So this is something I wanted to talk about, and to give a kind of short last point on that, just to get everything together. In the end, is obviously, in my point of view, the one of the biggest solution which we can all look into, the sense of having a decrease in primary commodity and increase in secondary ones, is a circular economy approach. And I show that picture quite regularly because I like it, even though there are some discussions about the numbers. So don't get me too much in detail about that, because they could be discussed, but the sense of it is the right way. Is about how much actually we lose within the supply chain and the value chain of copper in that case. And this is applicable for a lot of other commodities within the sector, whether it's bauxite, whether it's iron ore and others, that we're losing two different kind of parts in the value and supply chain. Those commodities, in that part, we can see, quite frankly, in the end as well, big times on waste separation and on scrap collection. So what we do need is circular economy approaches, which stick in the first part and are the heart of the company's achievements. And with that, obviously, the decarbonization impacts and the decarbonization and climate change and climate adaptation plans and management plans are involved in that will have a bigger value and a bigger impact. Circular economy approaches are actually tackled and enclosed in the governance of each entity working on that. There are other parts, obviously, which I haven't talked about in so much detail today. I've seen that there are already a lot of others who will talk about science-based targets, about the question on future knowledge and skills, open innovation, and so on and so forth. So I think that is quite the way to go forward with comprehensive ESG screening that includes science-based targets for climate, nature, modern slavery, finance sector and stakeholder pressures needs to be involved. And I want to thank you again for having me, and I'm happy to stay in touch, and please send me with the contact details you see there an email, and happy to answer that and get in contact with you. Thank you very much, and stay healthy. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Tobias. That is absolutely fantastic. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause from the other side of your muted microphones. So thank you very, very much for that, sir. Just a couple of questions, if I may. So the first thing is, so the your water risk filter tool, which you just showed us there, is that something that is freely available for people to be able to log in and play with, or how do people get access to it?
Yeah, so we have about 6,500 entities using that every day, and it's applicable. It's an open source data set. when it comes into the site-specific parts of a company, this is not shared, obviously. So this is something you have to get into and log in and actually get also kind of an access, which then has to be discussed with our water risk filter team. There are a lot of other tools with that. For example, the resilience and kind of the, how can I call it, the kind of outlook to 2030, 2050, with the CBD and different kind of SDG levels and parts to connect that with each of every company's core corporate values that needs to be then adjusted, obviously, for each entity. But this is obviously something you should be discussing with the people who are interested in it, and I get you in contact with our water risk filter team.
Fantastic. I'm sure that there'll be some people who will be doing that right now, actually, in terms of finding it online, etc., and getting in contact, because it looks fantastic. Secondly, I mean, you mentioned, obviously decarbonisation and the fact that recycling can't do everything. There's actually a lot of kind of leakiness, as it were, within the circular economy. Do you want to just highlight some of the things that different people within the conference perhaps ideally should be doing to help WWF meet the objectives that you're setting here? So what are some of the tangible actions that you hope to be seeing from across the world in terms of tightening up that circular economy with regards to, say, copper or raw materials in general?
Sure. Thank you very much for that question, Sarah. I mean, the first point, and this is kind of, we talk with a lot of different kind of sectors, and the first starting point I urge every company is to actually know where the commodity is coming from, right? This is a starting point, and we know how difficult that is, especially when we have artisanal and small scale issues involved in those supply chains. It's not, a soft commodity metal, so it's really hard to follow up and to see where it comes from, even though there's some technologies at the moment, but this is actually quite expensive. So you need to know what your risks are related to the area you're sourcing from. And if you don't know that, you can't actually mitigate those risks, and those are different, right? The copper sourcing from Chile is a huge freshwater issue in terms of freshwater scarcity. If you source from Zambia, there are totally different issues involved, especially deforestation, biodiversity loss, and human rights and regulation risks related to that. So that's the first thing I would urge every company to get into, know where your commodity is coming from. And the second part is also the importance of the governance and the sales team and the purchasing team to have the whether it's SDG or other kind of international sustainability parts as your heart in your heart of your strategy, right? So if you don't have that whole ESG thinking up the higher management, it's really difficult to only fulfill that kind of supply chain angle within your sustainability team. It has to come from the up top, and it has to be involved in the total process of the company, including purchasing and sales, and your supplier and tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So this is something which goes way further, and this needs to be done by the whole company itself.
Great. So there's that actually taking accountability in a way for where you're buying your materials from, but then also looking for that true governance and I guess culture within the organization that means it when they talk about sustainability. Would that be right?
That would totally be right. Exactly. And that, it depends on your application, but we can see that the consumers and the consumer-facing companies have been more under pressure to actually know where it comes from. I remember that we had discussion with car industry companies as well, ICT sectors 5 years ago, and some of them didn't get any email about where their commodity is coming from. Where's the iron ore coming from? I can tell you now that when it comes to lithium, when it comes to other commodities, there are way more emails and way more social media connections to the companies in the automotive sector, as well as to the ICT, to actually ask them where do they come from, and they want to buy that. So there's changing demand side from consumers as well, and this is something which goes down to the upstream companies of those mining companies. They want to sell those more responsible minerals because there's a market for that. This is something I think everybody should be thinking about.
Great. So it's that kind of increased focus and I guess quality when it comes to knowing about the provenance of these materials, etc. So one final question, if I may, which is on the financing side. So obviously there's been quite massive change, or at least increased focus in terms of, okay, how do we ensure that money is actually being invested or lent, for example, in a sustainable manner, or to companies that are acting in more sustainable and responsible ways. Do you have any comments with regards to that angle?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I mean, this is a difficult topic. I think the finance sector, we can see that in terms, again, it depends on what kind of impacts you want to look into, right? I mean, the social impacts are different one than the environmental ones, even though they are combined together. Environmental right is a social right, but I think we can see that there's a lot of de-investment, obviously, in the whole fossil fuels sector, but there's also huge de-invest in companies who are not following social license to operate, who are not following criteria such as FPIC. We've seen the issues in Western Australia with a company being exposed by the financial sector and the investors of those companies, and actually the CEO had to step down. So this is something, this is an example, and this is happening in a lot of other countries. We can see that in South America with different kind of companies at the moment. So this is the part we can see that investors and stakeholders looking more into this question of ESG in the sense of where are risks related to that, and they won't finance it. It's not as easy as it was, I guess, in some areas to get finance for a mining site when FPIC, social license to operate, have not been involved, and actually multi-stakeholder approaches with the communities haven't been involved. And the last point as well in financing, as it's also a lot of public funding comes into that. We can see governments are moving, and especially in the European Union, when we can see the regulation about the batteries regulation coming up, the conflict minerals regulation already is there, and then the supply chain due diligence process within the European Union, and this all tackles as well investment, right? And obviously the green taxonomy in the European Union, and all of that, I think, shapes together also the questions which were influenced by the finance sector itself to look really deep into how to invest sustainable and more responsible.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Tobias. And the good news for everybody is actually a lot of what Tobias has just said. We've got talks on things like FPIC, so free and prior informed consent. So if this is new to you, don't worry, there is a talk for you later on this week. And actually later on this afternoon, we're hearing for some fantastic speakers who are going to be talking about TCFD. So that's all about finance and carbon. And then also hearing from the insurance sector as well. So things that are going on in that avenue. So with that, thank you so much, Tobias. Really good to see you. Thank you very much for doing this pre-recorded video. It's the only one we're doing, but I hope everybody stays healthy. Thank you very much. Round of applause for Tobias, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.